So your minister has converted. I have changed religions, and I'm going to. And I think I owe that. I owe telling you that because I am your minister. You deserve to know that. So I'm going to rewind and then work my way up to my conversion experience. So it starts in 1982 on a rainy night. No, I'm not gonna start with my birth. Instead, I'm going to start with growing up at St. John's Unitarian Church. And I want to take a big highlighter out and highlight the Unitarian part of my upbringing. So it wasn't until I left that they became St. John's Unitarian Universalist Church. Even so, whether I don't really even care about the name, but what I do want to mention is that what I want to explore is the idea that they tapped much more deeply into the Unitarian heritage than they did the Universalist heritage. And I grew up learning about all these great luminaries from the Unitarian side of our tradition, our presidents, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Millard Fillmore. I learned about William Ellery Channing, who was the one who kicked off the Unitarian movement in 1819 when he preached this famous address known as the Baltimore Sermon. I learned about Theodore Parker, who was a famous, powerful minister and abolitionist, expressed this incredible amount of courage. He would harbor runaway slaves, and he would write his sermons with a gun on his desk in case people came in, and he said that he would be ready to defend the people that he was harboring. I learned about Susan B. Anthony and so many others in our tradition who, in the Unitarian tradition, who were these incredible models and luminaries and displayed all of this courage. And I think we tapped really deeply into the Unitarian tradition in terms of its theology as well. So Unitarian theology, the name Unitarian means one God. It's a rejection of the Trinity. But I don't think that that particular doctrinal point was really the point of Unitarianism. Instead, I think that there was something else that was really at the core of Unitarianism and that informed all else. And that was a rejection of John Calvin's doctrine of total depravity. He viewed people as so sinful that only the grace of God could save them. And Unitarianism believed that there was an inherent goodness in human beings. And because of that, they believed in the human being's ability to use reason when they approached religion. And so when something unreasonable happened in religion, when there was a doctrine that they did not consider reasonable, at that time, they thought the doctrine of the Trinity didn't sound reasonable. They couldn't kind of wrap their minds around it, and many today still feel that way. They trusted human reason to offer a different vision. Now, that human reason, that trust in human reason has been so important, and it has offered us so many insights. We've had these incredible scientists who have been a part of our faith. We've had these incredible theologians who have been a part of our faith, and they root themselves in that sense that human beings are inherently good and they should be able to use their reason to arrive at new understandings. At the same time that we have that incredible source in Unitarianism, there's also, I think, a bit of a pitfall in it, because when we focus so much on our reasoning capacity, we can kind of cut off our more feeling capacity. We can really sit together in, these kind of conversation circles that don't, go anywhere, that don't lead to action, that don't necessarily inform us to live better lives. We can become so. I am like feeling the spirit here too. So, yes. I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, what happens is that we can end up having, these kind of conversation circles that sort of stay in this airy, ethereal realm, and it never kind of grounds down or touches down. So what I have been appreciating since Article 2 has changed. We used to have 7 principles, and now we have 8 values. And what we say in Article 2 is that love is at the center. Love is at the center. Where does that come from? Does it come from the Unitarian side of the tradition, or does it come from the Universalist side? It comes from the Universalist side. That is the core doctrine of Universalism. And Susan read George de Benneville, who was a famous preacher in the 1700s, middle of the 1700s, and was saying at that time that love triumphed over differences in human beings and could expand the circle of who we included in our circle of concern. That goes all the way back to the 1700s. When we look at the profession of faith, the first one that was passed by the Universalists in 1790, it talked about infinite love being at the center of all things. And then when we fast forward, there are multiple statements of faith. When we fast forward to the early 20th century, it defined God as all-powerful, all-conquering love. And the outgrowth of that belief was this notion that informed kind of the core doctrine of Universalism, which is that if God is all-powerful, all-conquering love, no one is going to be damned to hell. There is no hell. It is impossible to believe in hell. And that was a profoundly felt experience for many Universalists. So I often think about this guy that I'm sure the name will not be familiar unless you've deeply immersed yourself in this history, Quillen Shin. Quillen Shin was a famous missionary in the late 1800s. He was called the grasshopper preacher. And the reason was because he would touch down in one city and he would pull together so many people that they would form a Universalist church. He would do it in a weekend, and then he would get on his horse and he would go to the next town. And the way that he did it is that he would go and find revivals that were happening, and he would kick over a soapbox and he would stand up on it and he would start preaching the doctrine of universal love. And he would pull those people who were a part of the revival in order to form a Universalist church. I mean, it was really an incredible story. He formed so many Universalist churches that the official headquarters of the Universalists had to tell him to knock it off because they couldn't keep up. They couldn't supply all of the resources that these new churches need, and they also didn't have enough ministers. But that really, sort of shows his oratorical power. I'm thinking today about what our world needs the most. I'm thinking today about what our world needs the most. And I do think that we need to honor that legacy of reason. It's really, really important because we see so much that's happening that is irrational and against, just a pure rejection of science. And there's just something that's really important about honoring that. But what we also see right now is a politics that defines itself by who is included and who is excluded. That is the core of the politics that we see in our world right now. It always has been, but it has become so prevalent right now. I would say that that's sort of always a part of right-wing politics, but now as we're sort of looking at nascent fascism, it is out front. This is the group of people who is included in sort of who our nation is and what we are. And it's racial, it's about gender, it's about what the family should look like, it's about citizenship. Those are the people who should be included, and then others are the people who should be excluded. And when I think today about what the antidote to that is, I think about universalism. Now, this tendency in Unitarianism to honor reason, to kind of tipped so far into reason has sometimes made it hard to explain Unitarianism to other people, right? Have any of us heard the idea that, Unitarian Universalists, like, they can believe whatever they want, right? And that's because we have this idea of human beings as inherently good, and we trust their use of reason, we also honor that might lead people in many different directions. And there's beauty and truth that we can discover in all the world's traditions. And so we come here, we gather here as a people of faith, celebrating those differences. And I, for one, love that. I love it. I think it's a strength of ours. I love to sit down with a group of other people who are coming from a Christian perspective and a Buddhist perspective and a Hindu perspective, and to hear all of those different voices explore what truth and beauty and goodness looks like. At the same time, that has tilted us in the direction of thinking we are so diverse that we don't have a core. We don't really have anything that sort of holds us together except kind of the desire to gather together in our diversity. Universalism never had that problem. Never had that problem. And the reason was because universalism centered itself on one particular doctrine. Love is at the center. And they defined that love as God. They said God is love, and that's what's at the center. I don't think we need to do that. I don't think we need to use the language of God. I think that is optional. But the core piece for universalists is that love is at the center, and that informs how we think about human beings, that informs our ethical responses to today's social issues. It informs what our political life should look like. It changes everything. And as I have been exploring this more deeply, thinking about it, feeling my way through it since the passage of Article 12, which clearly says love is at the center, I have realized that is what it is all about for me. That's what it's all about for me. Now, universalism was also expansive. When we entered the early 20th century, the symbol that the Universalists adopt was this circle with a tiny cross on the side. And the idea was that the Christian church and the Christian teachings were really important, but it was one teaching, one religion among many. And so the Universalists also had this openness to other traditions, but it was coming from a different place. It was coming from this place of this kind of widening expanse of love that included all human beings. And so therefore you also had to include all of the differences that human beings brought with them. There was also a humanist strain in universalism that was much more prevalent in Unitarianism. But the universalist strain in the humanist strain in universalism, before merger, before the Universalists and the Unitarians came together and formed the Unitarian Universalist Association, many Universalists were already considering the idea that they didn't need to use the word God for this. Now, many of them held on to it. And the idea was that in the Universalist church, you could have both. Today, we have both. But what you couldn't do without was that idea that there was love at the center, and that informed everything. Now, I'm thinking about what this looks like in real life, and I have two things that I want to bring up. Has anybody seen the documentary The Twister on Netflix? Anybody? Oh my gosh, okay, all right, you have something to do. Okay, I was completely fascinated by this. It was about the tornado that touched down in Joplin, Missouri in 2011. And it was considered the most destructive tornado to ever touch down in the United States. It was a Category 5 times multiple times. And what was so dangerous about it is that it was wrapped in a rainstorm. And so people thought, oh, a thunderstorm is coming. And they were caught completely off guard that it was this incredibly destructive tornado. So it interviews people who went through that. It interviews somebody who was sucked out of the window of his car and woke up miles away in a field. It interviews people who ran into a 7-Eleven and ducked down, and the entire structure was just lifted into the sky, and they were holding each other to the ground. And one person was like lifting up, and they were pulling that person down, and somebody else would start to lift up. It was really a harrowing documentary. But there's one story that really stuck out to me. And it was a story of this young man. He was a teenager at the time, and he was working at a yogurt shop. He was working that night in the yogurt shop, and at that point he was the only one because the tornado sirens at that point had gone off and people had left. And the thing about this young man is that he grew up in a very conservative congregation. And he started to realize something about himself as he was in that. He started to realize that he was gay. He was attracted to other men. And so he started to have this really deep conviction that when the rapture came, which he knew was going to happen in his lifetime, because that's what that congregation taught, the rapture was going to come. He believed that when the rapture came, he would be left behind. He would be left behind. And so the tornado rips through this yogurt shop. He ducks under a table, somehow survives. He stands up, everything around him, all of the buildings, all of the houses, everything is just gone, or it's just in rubble, or it's just these boards and bricks that are strewn everywhere. And he stands up, and what does he think? The rapture came, and he said, I'm the only one left behind. And he really believed that. It both has an element of hilarity in it and also this really deep poignancy to it. He really believed that he was left behind. And so he started to wander back to his house just in tears, that he was never going to see his sisters again, that he wasn't going to see his mom, that he wasn't going to see his dad or any of his extended family, and that he would be just here alone in the midst of all of this devastation. And so he's walking to his home, and down the other street, his mom is walking there too. And she had been at Target purchasing hair dye. So, so he says, thank God for Target. So he reunites with his mom, and he has this revelation that the rapture is BS, and that he would never, that no one is going to be left behind, and that is such a painful and terrible theology that he knows that he has to reject it. Now, does he go on to ascribe to universalism and, in sort of the traditional sense? Does he start to think that, there is a heaven and a hell and everybody's going to get into heaven, and, there's this idea of a personal God? All of that was a part of universalism at one point. Does he believe all of that? No. In fact, he tilts away from religion entirely and becomes more or less a humanist or an atheist. But what he starts to demonstrate in his interactions, in part because of that experience, was that he really wants to embody a form of love that will transform his community and that will transform other people's lives. And so he opens an LGBTQ center in Joplin, Missouri. He decides to stay there, and he says, I love this community and I love these people, even though there are these really painful elements to me personally. I'm going to come here and embody love. That is the spirit of universalism. It's right there, that right there. It doesn't even matter what the particular belief is. It's the decision to embody love in the world. I have a friend who is a Buddhist, and she talks about how, she's a chaplain. I'll get to the Buddhist part. She talks about how she has these interfaith meetings, and she talks about how there's this sense that when a Buddhist walks into the room and sits down in that interfaith meeting, that no matter what they were talking about, whatever they might have been, arguing about or having tension about, whatever sort of program or agenda they're trying to pursue, that person comes in and there's this sort of sense from many people in the room like, oh, thank goodness the Buddhist is here. And that's because they embody this sense of peace. And in her experience, they kind of come in and they have this deep, practice of meditation, and they just embody this peacefulness that helps them reorient. I've been thinking about what would it be like if it was the same for Unitarian Universalists. When we show up in the world, when we show up in an interfaith gathering or out on the streets, people say, oh, thank goodness the Unitarian Universalist is here, because they are going to embody that spirit of love. They are going to bring that with them, and it is going to change this context, this worry, whatever we're worried about, whatever we're experiencing anxiety about, whatever we're striving to, it's all going to be done in that spirit of embodied love. That will be so deeply rooted in our Universalist tradition, so much honoring those ancestors who carried that belief down into the present day, that I think that it is a worthy thing. I said that Unitarian Universalism is the easiest, simplest, clearest religion to define. I said that was my title. Now, I think a lot of people view that as counterintuitive. Do many of us view it as counterintuitive? Unitarian Universalism has often been considered a very, very complex proposition. And that's because we have this view that, all of these different traditions are wonderful, and we want them as a part of our congregation, and we want to honor that diversity and that difference and really gain something from it in terms of our own spiritual journey. So how the heck do you explain that to other people without it sounding that like there's really no core to Unitarian Universalism? It's just a meeting place for all of these different faiths. That's part of what makes us stumble. That's part of what makes us say, well, Unitarian Universalism, you can believe whatever you want. I want to offer another proposition. Unitarian Universalism is the idea that love is at the center and no one is excluded from the circle of love. And I want to suggest that that is a powerful proposition for the world that we live in right now, for the exclusionary politics that we see flooding all domains of our public life, from the division that we see in families, from the division that we have with other people. That message is one that could flood into our lives, into our hearts, and that could create some kind of change. So when you are on that elevator and somebody says, what is Unitarian Universalism? I'm going to invite you to think carefully about maybe not saying we can believe whatever we want, but instead saying what we believe is love is at the center and no one is excluded from the circle of love. It's a message that could change our lives. It's a message that could change the world.